Welcome back to Curtains Up, the show where we dive deep into the rich history and evolution of theater across cultures. Today, we have a truly special guest who will help us explore the fascinating journey of Chinese theater, Professor Xing Fan, from the University of Toronto. Professor Fan is an extremely accomplished specialist in Chinese drama, theater, and performance culture. She's a performer with training and stage experience in the performance arts, including Beijing opera, Kunshu opera, and kabuki theater. Join us as we uncover the influences, transformations, and the enduring legacy of Chinese theater with Professor Fan. Welcome to the show, Professor Fan. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here today.
I'm very glad to be here, Rohan. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Your insights and expertise in Chinese theater and performing arts are something I've been looking forward to sharing with our audience. We know our listeners are going to gain so much from this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Very glad to be here.
Awesome. Let's dive right in. I'd love to start by asking you a few questions about the history and evolution of theater in China. For my first question, I was wondering, how did Chinese theater evolve during the dynasties like the Tang, Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties?
hmm That's certainly a very important question. Now, what we know is that there are various theories with regard to how theater emerged in ancient China with different focuses and addressing different geographical locations. But we know what's common among these theories is that scholars generally believe that traditional theater emerged from a gradual amalgamation of music, literature, and various performing arts during a fairly long period of time. Um, some important examples of some early forms of performances with historical evidences, including something we called 100 games in Chinese, that's called 百戏. This was popular during the Han Dynasty already. This historical period lasted from 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD. So these 100 games is an umbrella term for the tremendous variety of entertainment. These include dancing and music performances, as well as magic and juggling. We now have wall paintings from tombs and unearthed pottery figurines to illustrate for us what 100 games entails. Um, and then when it came to the Tang Dynasty, which lasted from the 7th to the 10th century, another important performance form is called grand music. In Chinese, it's called 大曲. This is another important early performance, predates what we would call theater today. So grand music, we know most probably associated with court entertainment. This includes elaborate performances with instrumental music, vocal performance. So song was included, and then it features dance. So these are some. I just gave you 3 early examples of for the early forms of performance, right? But of course, there are a lot other more. So gradually, during this fairly long period of time, these different elements, music, dance, other types of performance, and then literature, which includes folk arts, storytelling, ballad singing. It is a long history of amalgamation of all these elements. And then we know that during the Song Dynasty, this is most probably the first historical dynasty during which we start to have written records of a list of play titles. So now the earliest records is about the Song Dynasty. And then after that, the Yuan and the Ming and the Qing, so these are the historical dynasties that are after the Song dynasty. Because China is such a vast area, there are always multiple forms of theatrical performances that are taking place. We know that, for example, in the 20th century, there are more than 100 local regional theatrical forms. And then today, there are a lot more than that. So when we talk about what people often call traditional Chinese theater, we're actually talking about a family of many flourishing and fairly active theatrical forms on stage.
That is like really interesting, and how much information you just gave with like how all the dynasties really pushed the boundaries each specific time period. And I just wanted to ask another question. Do you know when like how traditional Chinese opera forms like Kunchu or Peking opera how do they originate and evolve?
Sure. So 昆曲, oftentimes in Anglophone, is translated into Kun opera. This theatrical form originated from a local musical style in the Kunshan area, which is not too far away from Shanghai. So, 昆曲 originated from a local musical style in this area. The earliest form of this musical style was fairly famous and active during the 14th century. This theatrical form has a 700 or 800 years of history already. But the kunchu that we listen to and we watch today must be very, very different from the Kunshan melody during the 14th century, because this musical style went through centuries of development, through refinement during the Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. During the Ming Dynasty, this performance art form was combined with the best dramatic literature composed by the best playwrights. So that's probably, these are the two contributing factors for Kunqu's flourishment during the Ming Dynasty. And then around 15th, 16th century, all the way to the 18th century, Kunqu was the most popular theatrical form. Many masterpieces that we know today, for example, the Peony Pavilion, was made popular through the Kunqu version of these dramatic literature. Beijing Opera, this is the Anglophone translation for Jingju. In Mandarin, it's called Jingju. Jing refers to capital, Beijing Ju Theater. Jingju is a much younger theatrical form. Another example of amalgamation of multiple theatrical forms into something new. Now, in Jingju's music, for example, we can easily detect artistic nutritions elements from important theatrical forms, including kunqu. So I'll just quickly go through, right? There is generally believed that there are at least 5 major theatrical forms that nurtured the birth of Jingju, and these are kunqu, gaoqiang, 灰调, 汉调, and 梆子. So Jingju's history, we can trace it back to the last decade of the 18th century. That was when the Chinese emperor was celebrating his 80th year birthday. So they invited troops from around the country to the capital, to Beijing, to perform. And then many of these troops stayed uh, uh, long period of decades. When performers perform together, they learn from each other. So the period from late 18th century to the first 3 or 4 decades of the 19th century is generally believed to be the formation period of Jingju. This is a kind of like a brief history of Jingju.
Wow, so Jingju's a bit younger compared to Kunchu, right? And Kunchu's just
That's right.
Kunchu was more popular at the time.
Yes, yes. Kunqu was fairly popular, I would say, somewhere between 15th, 16th, beginning from 15th, 16th century. It was already very popular.
So got it. Okay. Well, considering your very in-depth knowledge on this history, I wanted to ask, um, are there any misconceptions about ancient Chinese theater that you'd like to dispel?
I feel that, Rohan, when we talk about theatrical forms that are quite different from the Euro and North American theatrical culture, it is important for us to address that terminology matters, because the use of certain terminology might be helpful or misleading. So I will just use the opera as an example. For example, 京剧, right, is oftentimes in Anglophone, often called Beijing or Peking opera. Um, I feel that this itself is a misleading terminology, because in Jingju acting, physical performance and combat is considered as important as vocal performance, which refers to singing and speech. Melodic passages and the percussive music of Jingju's traditional repertoire are often created, revised, and finalized by master performers and instrumentalists, and not by composers and librettists. And in addition, not all Jingju productions feature melodic passages delivered through song. Some Jingju productions feature only speech, and dance acting and combat. And also, at the center of these Jingju performance is the performer. And on stage, what we see is a multi-layered performance text, and with performer at the absolute center. So this is why I feel that, for example, to call it opera might be misleading. And then another thing I quite commonly use the label of traditional versus modern. Now, of course, it's totally understandable that oftentimes we're talking about a stock of repertoire that is established, made popular in the past, and oftentimes they're still very popular today, right? These are often labeled as traditional. But I feel it's very important to point out that traditional does not necessarily mean that it has not changed. It's these quote unquote traditional performing arts, they are passed down from generations to generation, from masters to disciples, as an innovative tradition. And these old forms, even with hundreds of years of history, they have always been changing. So I feel that that's very important for us to acknowledge.
I see. Thank you for clearing those misconceptions up. I never really looked at the changes between traditional and modern as something that could be like as something to be looked at as a misconception. But thank you for shedding a little light on that detail. That really helped me out a bit with understanding the topic more.
Sure, I feel that the how should I say, the label of traditional modern itself is not necessarily a misconception, but to understand traditional as something that is stagnant, this is misunderstanding.
Okay, thank you. And then for my final question, I wanted to ask, how is ancient Chinese theater taught or preserved today, both in China or internationally?
This is certainly an interesting, a very important question, Rohan. We know that today many of these traditional theatrical forms are inscribed as inherited, right? Of uh, uh, these are worldly renowned theatrical forms. So, and in China, it's also there are government have these state-sponsored programs for these traditional forms to to maintain their life on stage. We know that for as I said, right now today, for example, there are hundreds of regional theatrical forms still very much active on stage, and then we know that local theater schools are offering trainings for. These are conservative trainings for professional performers. In Beijing, for example, there's this Xiqu Academy of China. This is I think their official title is the uh, Academy of Chinese Traditional Theater. This is located in Beijing. This institute offers university-level conservative training. They offer BA and MA degrees. And I know that in China, some other major research universities also offer PhD programs through which students can pursue research opportunities on traditional theater studies. The and this is so for in terms of theater education, I feel that the government is actually making a lot of investment on how to nurture younger generations of talents for this profession. Internationally, I feel certainly that since 1960s, 70s, and especially 1980s, this increasing participation of Chinese 戏曲, so Chinese traditional theater practitioners, their increasingly active participation in intercultural theater and performance creations on the global stage is very important. In this intercultural theater and performance, they contribute with their expertise on stage, and then that certainly nurtured cultural exchanges and dialogues between Chinese indigenous theater and other theatrical forms. And I feel that also increased a lot of visibility of Chinese theater practitioners and their stage arts.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that Chinese theater is still taught and preserved today, and and I'm glad that the government is investing on how to keep these talents in circulation, and how even today it's still being practiced. So, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Of course, my pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of today's fascinating discussion on the evolution of theater in ancient China. We want to extend our deepest gratitude to Professor Fan for sharing this incredible insight and expertise with us. Your knowledge truly brought this history to life, and we appreciate your time and passion to the subject. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure.